Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. Today, if you've ever listened to Writers Group Therapy for any amount of time, you know that Roshni and I are both gamers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm into the Twitch stuff, and I play a lot of Genshin and a lot of Tomb Raider. And you like Dungeons and Dragons, and you're a Switch person, right?
Yep, and all the retro games.
You like the texty games and the retro games.
Yep.
Well, we were talking about writing for games and how cool that would be, and I thought let's have someone who's done this on. So today we have with us David Bergantino, who has he's been a great advisor to me and a mentor because, as you also know, I've developed a mobile game called Wordcursion, and he helped me find my developers and has coached me on that and stuff. So he's agreed to come on the podcast. Hi, David. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello there. Thank you very much for having me.
Welcome.
David is a veteran in this business. He has 30 years of experience in storytelling in both traditional and interactive entertainment, including with some of the biggest studios like Nickelodeon and Disney. He's worked with people like Wes Craven and Clive Barker and M. Night Shyamalan. I knew I was going to say his name wrong. M. Night Shyamalan and Neil Gaiman, that's so cool. Neil Gaiman's great because I actually did his course on Masterclass, so I want to hear about that.
Oh, great.
And you've sold over 20 million games, 11 novels, dozens of games, wrote stories you wrote a story and a script for a theme park ride for the Mummy.
Yeah, for the Mummy down in Florida.
Yeah, Universal Studios. So yeah, you've got like a huge, as a writer, it's kind of cool because you're writing for things that are like, you think about writing, you think about books and movies and all these other things that we consume as media and entertainment have to be written by someone, and you've done a lot of that.
Right.
Yeah. So how did you get into that area of writing?
Well, that's the thing is I started as a novelist. And so I have, on top of all the other stuff that you just cited, I have 11 published novels. And I got hired at Disney Interactive after I published my first novel, which was the novelization of Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So in essence, Freddy Krueger introduced me to Mickey Mouse.
Oh, scary.
Yep.
Great. And then it just kind of went from there, huh?
Yeah. So I got super lucky because this is the mid 90s, and this is when the ringing refrain across the game industry was, they'll just skip past it. Whenever it came to a cutscene or story. And part of that was fair in the sense that the technology wasn't really delivering photorealistic visuals at the time. There were still lots of jagged edges and polygonal shapes showing. So it wasn't sexy. It wasn't like you were watching a Marvel movie. You knew you were playing a game. And so they didn't really try all that hard to do good storytelling back then, partially for that reason. Plus, there was just a culture of, this isn't a book. We're not reading. This is about action. This is about gameplay. So even attempts at story were sort of, okay, if we must. And the other part of it was, my argument was always, well, if they're going to skip past it, why don't we write something that people won't skip past? Because, sort of going into it with the attitude, oh, they're just going to skip past it, was sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I got lucky because Disney is, as you might have heard, is very much into story and character. And so I got lucky by them wanting somebody not only who was a writer in a different medium, but I was a horror novelist. What the heck is a horror novelist doing at Disney Interactive?
Yeah.
But that was intentional on their part because they wanted two things. Aside from just a legit writer, is they wanted somebody who wrote for what used to be called the core gamer audience. who the shooters and Resident Evil and all the console games. And,
Mm.
Disney content at the time, particularly all the, Mickey Mouse, which was sort of in limbo creatively at the time, that didn't hit the core gamers, and that's where all the money was at the time. So me being a horror author was that box checked. The other is they didn't want a Disneyphile in the role. A lot of people, I don't know who you've met who works for Disney, but there are a lot of people who work for Disney who are working for Disney because they love Disney. They're steeped in Disneyana, but they didn't want that. They didn't want a Disney fan. They wanted a game fan. They wanted a writer.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep.
Wow. So, when you first started working for Disney, were you writing for their theme park or were you writing for their video game? I mean, I guess they didn't have a big video game
They
department back then,
oh, they
but
did, yeah.
oh, they did?
Yeah, it was called Disney Interactive. It was so this is 95 to 96. The whole thing came into being because uh, the Disney Interactive had been in business years before that, and somebody was brought in who used to run Chuck E. Cheese to shut down Disney Interactive because they weren't making any money. Instead, he turned around, published a huge game in the Aladdin game, and built up 1,000 people across 3 divisions, and that became Disney Interactive when I was there.
Oh my gosh, I always thought Disney Interactive was all educational stuff.
No, no. Back then, before it was officially Disney Interactive, so I think it became
Mhm.
Disney Interactive 93, 94, something like that. It was called Disney Software, and that's what originally was just storybooks and more educational software. As of the incarnation of Disney Interactive, the edutainment, which is where that word came from, the edutainment was its own division, and then we were the entertainment division that did the consoles and the core games. Not that we really
Oh.
published much outside of the movie games. I mean, I was hired not to write per se. It was more like I was hired to be a producer who had a writing background. And part of my remit versus a lot of the other producers was to create original IP for Disney Interactive. So I was dealing with all the like we did pitches for like The Rock. Remember that old movie? We were doing pitches
Yeah.
for all the internal sort of uh I forget what
The Rock, you mean the Nick Cage, Sean
yep,
Connery
yep,
movie?
yep. We
Oh,
were
they
doing
were doing a game for that?
well, we
Wow.
tried. We were pitching
Yeah.
stuff. It was sort of like I was doing the hardest. That's a hard way of a way of putting that. But I was doing the hard part in the sense that I was trying to create original IP in a place where all they wanted to do was license, or at least the semblance of license by just creating games based on their own characters. So I worked both to create original games, none of which saw the light of day, and also co-producing as an associate producer um, games like Hercules and this cult original game we came up with Donald Duck called Cold Shadow, and the Gargoyles game. Those were my first games, Gargoyles and Cold Shadow. And so that was sort of like my day job within Disney Interactive. And then I moonlighted as I created this what is now a very common form of interactive narrative game, like not quite what it's sort of like what Telltale is now, or what Telltale became.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of branching narrative
Yeah, branching area. I
storytelling.
created a design for that back in '95 based on a location based play I saw in LA. Um, I forget what it's called now, but a friend of mine worked in the box office and snuck me the script, and I broke down the script on how they created a play that took place in all over a mansion simultaneously, and I figured out a design for interactive narrative based on that. But then
Yikes. Yeah.
it was
Which basically wow.
You have to think very differently in that because you're not
Yep.
thinking linearly, right?
Right. Right. And that's where things have gone, even in linear games, like I just did Dying Light 2. And it's a linear game, but depending on what you do and what your choices are, there are different outcomes along the way for different side stories and even the main story. And so, and now that's come about, not to skip ahead, but now that's come about because it used to be, aside from the fact that now everything is photorealistic and wonderful and rich and giant, glittering worlds. Um, you've been reduced to just about two engines, Unreal and gosh, I'm not doing good at remembering today.
Yeah.
Unity, Unreal and Unity, and all these engines can do, and these two engines alone can do just about everything. And the point at which you've got two standardized engines that can do everything, when there used to be just the racing engine, the platform engine, the third person adventure engine. So these were all broken up into different engines. The moment you've got them all in one engine means all the games technically can look and act the same way, which means the differentiator becomes story and character, not technology.
That is so amazing because that's basically like modern gaming. So you basically changed the whole face of gaming by breaking down that one script, you know? That's so
Well, I mean,
cool.
like I said, sadly, I will be garnering no awards for that because it never saw the light of day, so therefore it does not exist in our world.
Mhm.
Because what happened shortly after was, then the 1,000 person division sort of collapsed in on itself because, man, oh man, were we spending money? We were flying all over the world and we were making games and spending money, and the games weren't making money. And then there was all the
Mhm.
money we spent on developing all these concepts. I actually still have concept art on my wall today. We did my I had concept art that was hand painted, like oil painted concept art.
Ooh.
That's we did storyboards for our pitches on like 4 by 6 panels of foam core. One pitch would fill an entire conference room all around, and we'd walk like stations of the cross from pitchboard to pitchboard. That's the kind of money we were spending, and of course, it collapsed in on itself shortly thereafter. With the first thing to go was all original material.
Yeah. Wow, that is amazing. I mean, from what I know of my limited video game history, though, I feel like the 90s was a lot of experimentation and like things didn't really pan out until the 2000s anyway, so it was kind of probably just bad timing, you know?
Well, it's cyclical, particularly with a place like Disney Interactive. The joke was that that your average job at the in the games industry was about 2 years. They put a lot of money into the start. They'd release something, it would bomb, and they'd close down, and that's pretty much a 2 year cycle. And was particularly true at the studios, minus Warner Brothers. But every 2 years, Disney Interactive. At one point, we were Buena Vista Interactive. At another point, they were Disney Interactive Entertainment, which was kind of unfortunate because that made the initials die. And
I just got that.
yeah,
Oh boy.
and every time they had one success, somebody used it as an excuse to repopulate the entire the entire division. So at the time, one of the other times it happened was with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It made a ton of money for the studio, so they then bulked it back up again and started making all sorts of stuff, and the same thing happened. None of that stuff um, made enough money, so they closed it down. Then, after a couple iterations of that, of course, the latest one was, well, first there was the buying of studios, but then there was the Toys to Life business with uh, the Disney Infinity, like the Lego things, like Skylanders. Disney was only
Oh
in
yeah.
and Disney was only in that business for 2 years before they shut it down.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Do you think there's a disconnect between what Disney felt people were, the audience that was watching stuff on TV and in movies, versus who was going to play the games?
Well, this is something that we struggled with at Disney. I think people kind of get it now, but we had other challenges on top of that. Um, we one of the big challenges was we were being forced is a strong word, but to create games that were to be released day and date with films. But
Yikes! Oh my God, that's insane.
that's insane anyway. But um, at the same time, they were so secretive about the movies they were making, they wouldn't share any materials with us until the very last minute. And
Oh,
that was something we finally got it, especially I think for Hercules and maybe Hunchback. But early on, it was so hard to make games because we would have to basically build the game blind based on um, just basically some storyboards and some concept art, but we had no assets we could use. We couldn't know the really we were not even allowed to know the story of the movie for a long time. And so we would kind of just kind of build an engine and then some mechanics and some levels and hope that and then just make stuff up once we got the information we needed. We would completely retrofit whatever story there was for the movie just to fit the game because we had to. That's all we could do.
wow. That's actually one thing we were wondering because games are such a visual medium. I mean, what comes first? Do you have to storyboard it first, or do you write, or do you do it concurrently? Obviously, in this case, you had to just kind of make stuff up, but like,
Well, it depends. It depends on the game. For the most part, it starts with the technology. What's our design hook? You know, for Dying Light for Dying Light, it's parkour. It's first person parkour. For so you know the Devil May Cry series.
mm-hmm.
That legend has it came out of a bug they found in a Resident Evil game where somebody would walk up to a wall in a Resident Evil game when they were developing it and bounce off the wall. And then they looked at that a couple times and went, "Hey, we could make a whole game based on that mechanic."
So random.
And
It's not a bug; it's a
you're
feature.
right, and that's where Dante comes from, and that's where Devil May Cry came from. So it generally is they create they find out what their core mechanic is. You if you're smart, you find out who your core audience is, and then you sort of back into the story based on um, the world that can be created by that um, by that mechanic. And the best way to look at it, the most simplistic way of looking at it, is to think of it as every video game is a superhero movie because superhero characters are their mechanics, it's their powers, right? And so you have to build everything around the mechanic of the superhero so that there's some balance in the world, whether it's Spider-Man and a bunch of Spider-Man. But if you notice, the formula of the early Marvel films are always the superhero and then the evil version of the exact same thing.
Ah, okay.
The Abomination is the opposite of the Hulk.
The Hulk, right?
Yeah, Ironmonger or whatever his name
Yeah,
was.
versus Iron Man, and
Yeah. So everything
mhm.
is versus itself, and that was their best way of showing of basically very simply setting up a world and then the dynamics that rationalize that character's powers, because that was something they could never do in the 70s, which is why the Hulk or Spider-Man ran around just breaking bank robberies. There were no supervillains. You need supervillains if you're gonna have superheroes.
It's like which came first.
Yeah.
Talking a little bit more about the writing side of
Yep.
it, and this will be easier if we move away from the companies you worked for that
Yep.
had all kinds of existing IP, and we talk about Return, One Way Trip,
Yep.
and now you have a sequel out, Return 2, Runaway.
Yep.
Those are unique IPs that you guys developed yourselves. and it's a 2D side scroller. If you haven't seen it yet, it's a really spooky horror game with some kids in the woods, and then they get on a spooky train. And talk about the development of that story, because I feel like that probably came more out of the story idea, didn't it?
Yes, but what happened was I was approached by the producer of that because he had all the assets. He had a train. He had an idea of a basically a Japanese anime themed horror something or other, and but needed somebody to write the story pretty much after he had created all the assets.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, and but
That's kind of like somebody saying, "I've got an old farm ranch. Somebody write me a script to do a movie on it."
well, the biggest, and oh yeah, actually yes, that's very much like that. The difference, the difference with games, and this is and just about any other medium where writing is important, like film and television in particular. Well, books are easy because the writer is the thing, right? Because you don't write a novel by committee. I sit down, I write a novel that's either finished or not because of me. Film and television is more collaborative, but even if you're getting your script notes from a producer, 9 times out of 10, even if that person is not a writer themselves, they've been steeped in entertainment and knows what is good or bad about a story, for a film or a TV project. The problem with games is that most writing is judged by people who have no connection with writing.
Oh, that's so true.
We pull that quote, post it on the thing. That's the
That's a
quote from the
meme.
thing right there, yeah.
A meme right there. Yeah.
And so that's why you get, but and then there's the whole everyone's creative, right? So that's why a game like Return, sort of backs into what the story is, because ooh, I know what can sell this type of art and this kind of story. I've got the framework. Oh, I need to put something inside that.
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
and that's all well and good, because these are the kinds of things, especially having worked with IP, other people's IP, I kind of excel at that, because like with IP, all these frameworks already exist, so I need to work as efficiently as possible to make something cool within that. And that's what I tried to do with Return, and I had a lot of leeway for what that became. So literally, I was given all these visuals and a couple starting points, and I just did what I thought would be a great Japanese horror film style story. I co-designed all the puzzles to fit, like to be integral parts of that story, not just here's the story and here's the puzzle. It all came together. I had so much fun on that project.
I think it shows too. It's a really cool game.
Oh, I'm glad you like it. It's an experience of its own. It's not zombie parkour. It's like reading a book that you walk back and forth while you're doing it.
Mhm.
But you know what? For it being that, I hope I pushed as much out of it as possible for scares and for character development. I wanted I, to me, even it's a very emotional story. So
Hmm.
I probably, that is the one game of all the games that I've written where that's me. If you want to know what game I would make, if you gave me all the money in the world, that's what I would do.
Which that's awesome, because how many people can say that about a project?
Right.
Usually you're working towards the one you want. I'd be curious too, because games are interactive and, like you were saying, for example, a novel is a solo act versus, collaborative effort. How do you anticipate in your writing, like that what if the player tries to break the game? Like how do you anticipate somebody's every move in writing?
Well, to some extent, that's covered by the way the game designers do the game.
Mm, okay.
Because they limit what you can do. It also depends on the style of the game. If it's Dying Light, which is open world, there's all sorts of technical ways they can break the game, let alone story. And and so luckily, I mean, play a lot of games, so I understand how stories can work, and I'm very big on continuity, even with especially with games, because of that issue. But for example, a game like the Uncharted series, those are very oriented, but they're also linear. And
I'm
so,
actually playing those right now. I'm in Uncharted 2 right now. I've
oh
started at the
great,
beginning.
oh
Yeah.
great.
So yeah, yeah, they are very linear. But
Mhm.
yeah, you kind of have story and then action, then story, then action.
Right, but what they did though was, I mean, you can skip through the visuals, but they made an effort to, I mean, the cutscenes. They made an effort to make to have that to take a holistic approach to telling the story of that game, so that the gameplay is cinematic and the story bits are so well produced you want to see them for the same reason you would sit and watch a scene from a movie. And
Hmm.
so and the only, as far as I'm concerned, the only way that even happened is because those guys could afford to do it themselves by that time. No one was really going to take a chance. They wouldn't have never have taken a chance on a new studio with that form of game. But it was Naughty Dog, who had already produced a bunch of big hits, and so they could afford to build their own demo of that, and that's why that game exists. It's not because publishers are going, oh, this is what we want to do. Nope, it was because the developer decided that's what they wanted to do.
Oh, wow. So the developer kind of is like, I guess, where the buck stops, right? Like a director of a film. It's the
In
developer?
In this case, yes. I mean, they're sort of like the production company, but it
Mm.
it it depends on, again, it depends. If you have somebody like Naughty Dog and Insomniac, who incidentally both came out of the Universal, uh, mid '90s, early '90s Universal version of, well, Universal Interactive, and they were given a tremendous leeway to create, and who later has so much power that they can do stuff. That's fine. Everybody else, it's more like the studio system. You have to make what the money people are giving you, and it's the second game. If you've done well with the first game, listening to them, the second game they'll listen to you.
Ah, isn't that always the way?
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm curious. All right. So I write YA fantasy. I try to hit 60,000 words minimum. Tom and I both write scripts, maybe around 120 pages or a little bit less if it's
Mhm.
comedy or something. What is an average game script? What's the length of an average game script?
Again, and I think, and this is the blessing and the curse of writing. There are almost no standards in writing. Like even like every script, except for some of the newer ones, you're usually shooting for around, 95 to 120 pages. Novels, like you said, you easily rattled off some ranges of the kinds of novels, because I've done the same thing. But for games, it just depends. I mean, we wrote reams and reams and reams and reams for Dying Light 2 because it's a huge open world, and there are also t- like a dozen different things to write for, like the cutscenes versus the in-game scenes versus the background dialogue versus reactions to specific things that happen. There's all these parts that have to get put together, whereas everything else is more monolithic. I wrote a little pot farming game that was, oh, about 10,000 words. I wrote an adult fantasy game that was about 30,000 words. I would say I've written at least at least four novels worth of text for Dying Light, and that's
Holy moly.
and that's and
Wow.
that's not me originating. Like, that's just the stuff that I built for them, and some of the stuff I polished, let alone the sum total of all the text there is in the game. There's an insane amount of text in this game.
Wow. Okay. How is that different from doing the theme park stuff? I have to before we wrap up. I got to go back to the Mummy because that's so cool. How did you get involved in doing a theme park ride?
Well,
Because I know like Disney has very narrative
Yeah.
theme park rides.
Yeah. Uh, this was early on. A friend of mine was actually the design director for the park. She had cut her teeth on the very first, the Halloween nights thing.
Yeah.
She like I went to the very first one of those because that was one of her first
Wow.
big successes. And then she transferred to Florida sometime after that and just calls me up one day and says, "I need you to do this." And I was at a mall and we actually brainstormed the story for the ride while I was pacing in a mall in Burbank. And then
Really?
yeah, and like and me especially, I was early in games and I was always like, she just wanted a story. I'm like, yeah, but there's a ride. It's gotta be mechanics. It's gotta be tense. And so I had her. I suggested that they do this thing with a track where towards the end, because there's the mummy and then there's the good guy. I forget who's who. I've never really seen the movies. I've actually never been to this ride, and there's like this tug of war and you just zip through one of them or their mouths and you're done. And I'm like, no, 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 you need to rock the ride on your way there so you feel like it's a tug of war. You have to tilt the, if you can do it without killing people, you should do this. And she's like, oh yeah, yeah, that's a great idea.
Don't kill people. Good tip. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I later, then she sent me the outline and said, okay, write a script based on this. It was only what the ride's what, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. It's not very much, and there's only so much you can do. But it was sort of based on my experience with the Indiana Jones ride and what didn't work for me with that.
Huh.
Ah.
I will say the Mummy ride, at least the one I haven't been to the Florida one, the one here in
Mhm.
California, if it's based on the same thing, is one of my favorite rides. So, good job.
Well, they're actually completely different rides, I found out.
Are they really?
Oh no.
Oh! I'm
Yeah,
sure the
and
Florida one is better.
yeah, I don't know. I like I said, I've never been, and I don't know if it's still there. I haven't looked lately, but there have been. I think at one point they changed the rides for the Tom Cruise Mummy.
Oh, interesting.
Oh yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
Yeah,
That was
Huh.
the not a good, that didn't go very well.
yeah, no, no, it did not.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Speaking of Florida versus other places, you said that you used to live in LA, but you recently moved to the East Coast. What is it like writing outside of an industry center, or does it not matter at this point in your career?
Well, it doesn't, and that's exactly why I moved.
Mm.
I mean, I didn't dislike LA. I've lived there for 30 years, and I've moved away several times and always come back. Um, LA as a entertainment industry and for games is not really relevant to my world. Plus, my world, I work for clients in Poland and China and South America and maybe and one in the U.S., but all of their developers who are offshore. And at one point, I just said, "Hey, I can do this from anywhere, and if I can, where would I go?" And I just landed somewhere that's peaceful. I got a house and nice surroundings and an amazing neighborhood. And it's just quality of living is higher for me right now, and I'm still doing exactly the same thing I was doing in LA. And I still have contacts in LA. I've I've been at this a long time. And so so I didn't lose anything. It used to be, oh my God, you leave LA, you're done for. I'm like, eh,
I feel the same way.
yeah.
Sitting in Ohio.
Hmm.
This has been really cool. I loved hearing about all the different things you've done. It's kind of a strange industry to get into. What suggestions do you have for someone who's interested in getting into game writing?
Yeah.
Are there classes, or is it just kind of like come up with an indie thing, do it yourself, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways because again, it's very non-standardized when it comes to writers, and also writers are the least of what developers even are thinking of in terms of hiring. And so the for the youngins, it's go to go to. There are plenty of decent video game programs within schools now, although they're mostly centered around technology like programming and art. If you get into the program, they all now have side bits on design and storytelling, and it's not even, you would think that like USC, which probably has the biggest, most famous one, I have never spoken there. I have never, and whereas all of my producer friends and designer friends and artist friends, they've all become adjunct professors there. Just
Ah,
meanwhile, like a Hollywood screenwriter is the head of the program. The
you
guy
know,
who,
there's a professor there who listens to our podcast because he's made his students listen to some of our
oh
podcasts.
really?
So if he's listening, call David.
He's probably a friend of mine. I know almost everybody there, and that is only to say that that that's the level. That's a gauge of the stature of film of writers in games. If a place like USC kind of ranks them that way, your next best bet, as far as I'm concerned, is just get a job at a publisher or developer for whatever. Usually, it's a tester or associate producer. Although I think things have changed since I started, but you basically just have to be in somewhere. And both for writing and this is if you're not yet, if you're a published writer or you've got some writer's chops, that makes it easier for you to look on either at on websites for publishers or developers and see if they're looking for, because the narrative director or writers of any sort. And then if you have credits, then that can kind of skip you to the writing part. Otherwise, or if you're not finding that, what I suggest people do is find out what games you like and then go approach those companies, because you already have what one of the big things that they need is passion for what they do. And
That's
so
a good point.
yeah,
Yep, you gotta have passion.
yeah, and then and an affinity. If like like I mine is like, if I could, I would write for Double Fine right now. I just finished Psychonauts 2 and I loved it, and I'm like that's the game I wanna play. That's the game I want to write.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I would do is I'd start looking around to see if they need anybody, pull some strings. I want to do that, but it's because I have a total affinity for what they do. I love it, and that's, I think, and you can go, and especially on mobile, it's really easy to browse games and see, well, I've never heard of that game before, but you know what? I like what they're doing there. Maybe I should talk to them.
Cool. What's next for you, and where can people find you online if they're looking to connect with you or see what you've been working on?
Well, let's see. What am I working on now? A ton of stuff, most of which I cannot speak out loud.
Oh, the game industry is super secret, isn't it? It
Yeah,
is really secret.
yeah.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is I'm continuing on with Dying Light, not just on Dying Light 2, but for two other projects.
Ah.
I have two projects with ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok in China.
Oh, wow.
I created an IP for an upcoming um, NetEase game. They're another huge Chinese company. And then I'm basically doing, oh, I can't wait till I can talk about this. I am doing a project that I myself have been trying to get off the ground for over 20 years. It finally
Wow.
got off the ground, not because of
Congrats.
me,
Ooh.
but I got then engaged to work on this project, which is the project that I've been wanting to do for decades.
Ah.
I kid you not.
Well,
That's
congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you. And
We'll
that,
have to have you back when you can talk about it.
yeah, yeah. Oh, and that the stories I can tell because of my history with this particular IP. Oh, oh,
Cool.
oh. But so yeah, and it's a full range of adventure, first person, mobile, console, um, I'm doing an MMO. I'm doing 2 projects for another Polish MMO company in Poland, and then a bunch of kids stuff for another US based publisher. So it's a
Wow.
full range of wacky cool stuff, all of which I love. My favorite thing about the way this has all turned out. And you know that this isn't the case in a lot of cases, especially, is that I am working on everything that I love, and I love everything that I work
Knock on wood.
That's amazing.
on.
Cool. Okay, well, check out David Bergantino's games on various platforms and consoles. I know Return and Return 2 are on Steam.
Right.
But yeah, congratulations and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks. If you want to check out coldroomentertainment.com,
Oh, cool.
you can check out all my publicly available projects and ways to play them and where they're to be found. You can also check my Facebook authors page, where I post stuff on projects as they're. I'm about to post a new project that I just got engaged that I can talk about.
Cool.
And that wing recipes and puns. So there you go.
Great.
Those are the best ways. I'm not a huge social media guy, but I do promote my stuff when I can.
All right, great. Thank you. Everyone else, thanks for listening, and do follow us on Twitter and Instagram at wgtherapy.com, or check us out at writersgrouptherapy.com, and we'll see you next time.